Rhonda Noordyk is a CDFA, a respected divorce financial strategist, and a podcast host. She's known internationally for her work in pioneering a path for women to navigate through the financial aspects of the divorce process. As a strategist, Rhonda helps her clients determine their next best financial move. Now, she's been a featured expert on numerous podcasts and several big online publications. Rhonda's podcast is called Disrupting Divorce: Conversations for Women. And I've been honored to have her on my Find Me the Money podcast before, and Rhonda is just a fabulous collaborator in the divorce space. So welcome back, Rhonda.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Well, we are talking today about women in divorce, your next best financial move. And I always get excited about talking about women and finance and divorce because I think that it is such an underserved market. There is such a need there for women to get tougher about what's happening on that financial piece of the divorce, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I mentioned your podcast, Disrupting Divorce for Women. And I want you to talk a little bit about disrupting divorce because I know that that title has ruffled some feathers in the divorce community.
Yeah, absolutely. So I launched my podcast about 5.5 years ago and really felt like it was time to make a shift. And the word disruption really means to be looking at ways that we can do things better, more efficiently, more effectively, particularly for, in this case, women. And yeah, I wanted to be able to have the tough conversations, challenge the status quo, of course, coming from a real place of caring and advocacy. But yeah, but it has definitely ruffled some feathers. I think people think that the word disruptive is, well, she's going to come in and, flip the tables and try to be aggressive and disrespectful. And that's really not the intention at all.
Well, there's different stat that people will cite about what happens to women in the finances in divorce. Whatever the numbers are, specific numbers don't really matter. The is that in divorce, women have been getting the short end of the stick financially. They've been getting that for decades. They've been getting far less than half of the assets. They haven't necessarily been getting alimony and child support that's been fair to them. And you're here to help age that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I have often said, the calculations, particularly around support, are only as good as the numbers that we're putting into the calculator. And I know that's where you come in, Tracy, because the transparency on some of this stuff is really, really challenging. And so, yeah, definitely have been able to move the needle and really excited to continue a refreshed mission, right, to really be able to help women move the needle.
Well, let's go into the strategy piece because we're here to talk about your next best financial move. And a lot of what I do is about the facts and finding out facts about money. And that's really critical. But once you have the facts, then you need to start being strategic about how do you get your best settlement? What is this settlement going to mean for you 10 or 20 years down the road? And there's lots of great divorce attorneys out there, but let's be real. Many of them are falling short when it comes to the money strategy in this, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the reality of what we're seeing behind the scenes. I think people want to believe that their attorney is going to advocate for them financially, but when it comes down to it, in the 11th hour, or you're at the negotiation table, things are being missed or forgot about or left behind. And I can give a quick example. I was in mediation recently with a client, and there were some conversations that were had early on in the case, as far as, oh well, we'll deal with it. It's the, hey, we'll deal with it later. We'll deal with it later. And you get into the 11th hour, and they're like, hey, what about that money we talked about that he took out of this account as an advance? What month? Suddenly now they forget, right? Oh, that was so many months ago. That was a year ago. We just need to focus on getting this done. And here's what's being presented today. And it's leaving women extremely frustrated with the process.
Or just, not really being aggressive on the money issues. I'm working on a case right now where the attorney was asked probably 2 months ago to subpoena 3 different banks because there was a handwritten note that husband had, that wife found, that ink names and account numbers. And these are accounts she had never heard of in her life. So we said, fine, let's subpoenas to the banks. And this attorney still 2 months later hasn't bothered to lift a finger to send subpoenas.
That's an interesting thing because I think for whatever reason, the word subpoena is like it's like a trigger for attorneys. They don't want to do it. You know what I mean? They don't want to do it. And I think a lot of that comes from them. And again, the conversations I've had, hey, I don't want to seem aggressive to opposing counsel. I don't want to be sending 80 subpoenas. I'm like, nobody said anything about 80. How about 3? How
Right.
about 4? I mean, it's a form letter, right? I mean, I don't want to oversimplify, but at the end of the day, it's a form letter that you're sending, requesting information, waiting to get it back within a period of time. I don't know. Like, I just feel like they don't want to do it. And you're right. It's leaving women in a real pickle because if we don't have the transparency on what's actually going on, how can you be negotiating in your best interest if you don't even know what you're negotiating? That doesn't even make sense.
Right. Or like a case that you and I worked together on last year, where I feel like the first attorney that she had looked at this first settlement offer that came across the table. And I don't know what it was. It was something in the neighborhood of $1 million in a property settlement, right? But collectively, they had a lot more marital assets, and that wasn't her fair share. And the attorney seemed to feel like, well, it's $1 million. I'm happy with getting $1 million to walk away from this. And you and I dug through it and said, absolutely not.
No, absolutely. I mean, and she walked away with $1.2 million more. In addition to that, I think there is definitely a bias that people are bringing to the table to say, hey, listen, if I'm dealing with somebody who has, X amount of dollars, they're going to be just fine. And I always say, we got to define what fine is. First of all, it's not your job or my job to tell them they're going to be fine. It's our job to look at the picture and say, hey, let's come up with some strategies around how things could get divided, based on your goals and based on the numbers. And that's really, the key. I recently had, well, this was actually brought up recently with a client that I had the attorney say, Rhonda, you're being a pain in the ASS. And I was like, listen, you can call me whatever you want, just get the information. And what was happening was there was a pension. He was saying he didn't have a pension. I knew that he worked at a company that they did have a pension during that period of time that he worked there. They said, well, he said he doesn't have one, blah, blah, blah. I said, can you please just go direct to HR and find out, does he or does he not have one? Well, in the meantime, they signed the agreement, the marital settlement agreement. And I was like, oh my gosh. So anyways, long story short, he reached out to the company. They came back and said, oh yeah, he's got a pension. So they ended up having to thankfully amend the marital settlement agreement. They were able to do that. And she was able to get that quadroed. Otherwise, that would have been left in his hands. She would have had no idea that it really existed. She wouldn't have gotten half of it should something happen to him or she retires or whatever. It's a real problem. And, I said, listen, you can call me whatever you want, but let's get the information. And he really, at the end of the day, said, gosh, Rhonda, he wasn't grateful. I don't think. I think he still thought I was a pain. But that's okay. My client's in a better place because of that.
Why do you think some attorneys are just not through on these things? Do you think it's laziness? Do you think it's they've seen too many cases where, oh, we've gone through the effort and the subpoena nets us nothing? Or what do you think is driving that?
That's a good question. I think there's probably a couple things. I mean, I think the attitude sometimes is, hey, it is what it is. I think there's that part. I think it's also that there's attorneys that have been doing this for a long time. They're getting ready to retire. They're kind of like, Rhonda, I need to land this plane. You've got all this energy. You're bringing this renewed sense of energy, and I just want to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even feel like they want to finish strong. They just want to finish. And I'm like, I don't know. If I get to that point, Tracy, I'm out of here. Like if we're not doing this work because we're passionate about it, no, thank you. Because
Right.
this is not like the easiest, choice in career but we're passionate about it, right? So if we get to that point, you have permission to say, Rhonda, you've lost the passion. Time to move on. you know?
When someone hires a divorce attorney, they do so fully believing that this person has their back 100%, that this person's going to advocate for them. They don't expect that someone's mailing it in. They really don't.
No. And I've said, all along, it's like, okay, we've got to have a standard for, what we're looking for when we're making introductions or referrals to, particularly attorneys. And there are really good ones, right? There certainly are. And when I find
Uh-huh.
them, I'm like, listen, just so you know, you're not going anywhere because I need you. Um,
Right.
and they're fun to work with, and we can, like, I love being able to partner with them, partner with you, partner with them to know, listen, at the end of the day, right? Our mission, we're united. Even though we all have our different areas of expertise, we're united with a common mission, which is to make sure that people are leaving this space, right, in the best way possible. Given, and we've done the best job that we really can.
Okay, so this next best financial move, what are women asking you most often?
So there's a couple things, but I think the most often asked question is, Rhonda, am I going to be okay? I mean, that's, we could, when we kind of peel back the layer of the onion, it might look a little different on how they're actually asking it, but that's really at the end of the day what they're asking. And and I will never say, yeah, you're going to be like, yeah, you know what? Let's dig into it. Um let's find the answers. Let's get you what you need to answer that question. And yeah, and define what fine means for them.
Yeah. Find is something really different for a lot of people. And I know my clients are saying, will I be able to keep the house? Will I be able to buy groceries every month? Right. There's that level of fine. Then there's a level of fine where there's some more affluence, but they're still worried about. I've become used to a lifestyle, whether someone judges that or not. Am I going to be able to still live like I've been living, or am I going to be in the poorhouse?
Yeah. It's interesting when I was just reading a blog article the other day when somebody was talking about the lifestyle piece. And I'm like, God darn it, will we just quit saying that? Because at the end of the day, nobody takes that serious. They're like, oh, sorry, you're going to have to clip coupons. You're going to have to sell your house. It is what it is, and move on. And I don't like that. I don't think that's okay. And, I've been sitting at the table, right, of the client who lives in a multi-million-dollar house and has this giant table. We have papers all over the place and we're trying to make sense of it and get stuff organized and come up with a plan. And she doesn't have any more peace. Because if she doesn't know what the bank account means for her, I always say it doesn't matter how many zeros are in the bank account if we don't know what it means for us. And I was able to take, all of those pieces and make sense of it for her and come up with a strategy. And again, another great success story, of a woman who left and now she is in a really good place years later and able to pour into nonprofit organizations. But she was almost being dismissed because there was wealth there. There were assets. It was almost like reverse bias. There's this bias of like, why are you even asking? You're going to be just fine, which is kind of what we've been talking about. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to be able to really help people no matter where they're at. Um, and I guess there's always this part of like I just want things to be done right,
Right.
and I'm willing to fight for that stuff.
Tell me about some of the financial challenges that you typically see for women who are going through divorce.
So, what's interesting, Tracy, is I think a lot of times people think it's dollars and cents, right? For me, the thing that I think is the biggest challenge actually comes down to confidence. Because women have been taught to believe that they're not good at money, they're not smart enough, they have to do this whole like, girl math thing that everybody's seeing on TikTok, which my daughter says to me the other day, "Oh my gosh, mom, I have, it was free." I'm like, "What do you mean?" "Well, it came out of my cash pouch." I'm like, "No, no, it wasn't free." I'm like, just because you pay cash for something doesn't mean it's free. Like, oh, for goodness sakes, right? But I think, there's a lot of opportunity for us to be able to say, hey, listen, once they can be confident around the knowledge and the experience, they can move in the direction of being confident. The tricky part though, the um what do I want to say? The trap can be for the people that are like, oh, I'm confident. I've got, I just talked to a gal today. She's like, Rhonda, I'm an initiator on the financial personality profile. I have experience. I know where the money is, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know what your biggest challenge is going to be? Biggest challenge is going to be you think you know everything.
Right.
Because you've got a good handle on it, right? And I said, hey, you've got a great foundation for us to build off of. But I know that even after having come out of the financial industry for 13 years, it took me at least 2 years to even get my arms around all of the things that were specific to the divorce
That's true.
process, right? And I said, now, right, you and I doing this all the time, there's always stuff we're learning. I never feel like I've arrived. If I don't know the answer, I'm constantly seeking, reading, researching, talking to people, right? I mean, if we don't want to learn and grow, we're in the wrong place. And you and I do this all the time. So, that's going to be the challenge. Is the confidence is the area where there's a gap. But then when we get to that point, it's also still realizing that you may need an expert to do a deeper dive and be that sounding board, be that strategic partner and collaborator, as you've got a good base for us to build upon.
And I'm going to add to the advocate for yourself is sometimes a challenge as well. Even with really assertive women who typically will go for it, when you start getting some pushback in your divorce, it can be really, really hard. It's an emotional process. This is a person you probably still love that you're negotiating with, your ex, and it can be hard to advocate for yourself. And one of the things that I like about being involved in the divorce process is I can sometimes be the bad guy. Okay, I can advocate for her and I can say, wait a second, that doesn't sound fair to me. And sometimes it's easier for me to say than for her. Like behind the scenes, she's like nodding her head saying, yes, yes, yes. She didn't think it was for either, but I'm kind of taking that bad guy role. And I really enjoy that piece of it.
Yeah, it's really huge. It's really huge. And you're right. I think that piece of it is certainly something that I see as well, as far as women feeling like this shame, right? Like, Rhonda, I don't want to ask for that because I don't want to feel like I'm being greedy. I don't want to feel like, I'm not being kind or thoughtful or whatever. And it almost sometimes then swings the pendulum to the other side where I'm like, okay, wait a minute. You're giving way more than you would be, right? Your male counterparts would be giving because you're operating from a position of guilt or shame.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what can women do to determine their next best move when it comes to money and divorce?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, certainly one area that we have really been able to focus on is my signature method, which is called Bridge. Bridge came out of a test and measure, test and measure, test and measure of 9 years worth of being in this space. And finally, I was like, listen, I can bring a lot of value to people in a group setting that has been very, very successful. And the nice thing about it is, right, it kind of, there's a selfish aspect of it, and that is that I love teaching. I taught in higher education for 15 years. I developed curriculum, taught at the college level, and loved it. Literally started my first class knowing absolutely nothing, had never taught, a college course. Didn't, of course, tell anybody that until after the semester is over. That's the key, right?
Yes.
And I wasn't faking it. I just showed up and I was like, listen, I'm just going to pour in. And then we got to the end of the semester. I said, oh, hey, by the way, right? This is my first semester teaching. And they were like, no way. And so I brought that same passion and energy to the Bridge program. And I thought through, how do we take concepts that might be a little more intimidating or difficult to make them manageable? So each of the letters for Bridge stands for something. Breathe and build your team, review the financials, identify the gaps, dial in the data, guide to finish strong, and then exhale. And the nice thing about, that process is it's really giving women a great foundation to be able to build on. Now, they might say, hey, isn't this the same process that the attorneys take? Well, listen, I always say we're all kind of reading out of the same book, but one of us is, right, singing soprano and the other is alto, and I'm looking at everything from that financial lens. So we still want to be able to work in tandem with the attorneys. And so I am following a general flow, but really, being able to share my signature method that, again, I didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, I think I'm going to try this. Like, this has
Right.
been years in the making to be able to launch this program.
Well, I love that you say that with the Bridge program, you can go from crisis to closure in 6 months. And so we're going to link that program in the show notes, of course. I also have a quiz that I love because it is there to help determine next best move.
Yeah, absolutely. We love quizzes, right? And so,
Yes.
yeah, feel free to take the quiz and determine, yeah, what is your next best move?
So much good stuff to talk about. And I know you and I could talk for hours about these stuff. Thank you so much for sharing with us once again.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.